I'm Arina Bokas. This is the future of learning. Live and learn. Most of us have used this expression, often in reference to some life lesson that leaves us in a state of dismay. It is also a very precise way to capture the fact that our learning does come from something that is profoundly relates to us as individuals. And for the most of human history, what children learned was also profoundly related to their lives and determined by necessities. With a progression to formal education, however, the content started to slowly separate from everyday tasks, leading to what we have now: modern curricula that often seem unrelated to learners. The result? Students see school as a boring place and learning as a daunting task. David Perkins, Senior Professor of Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the writer of FutureWise, Educating Our Children for a Changing World, has kindly agreed to connect with us on Skype and offer his thoughts on how the content of education can become meaningful to students. Dave, thank you very much for connecting with us today.
Pleasure.
Let's start with the present and the existing knowledge. In our world today, new information is accumulated daily, but our students are also required to know more and to know it sooner. But while the body of knowledge is limitless, a human body isn't, and we can't process all this information. So with this said, what can be done at schools today to make all this required curriculum and content absorbed by students, so to speak, and hopefully so they feel it means something to them?
Well, I think you put your finger on a major problem of our era in education, and I think we need a bold solution. We need to get rid of a lot of what we usually teach, and we need to pull in other topics that speak more powerfully to the lives today's learners are going to live. So, for example, let's see a little less time spent on quadratic equations or on mitosis, themes that almost never come up later on in students' lives unless they're in some specialist role. And let's see more attention to themes like statistics and probability, which, dry as it sounds, come up all the time. Or the complicated nature of democracy, not just the ideology and basic functional characteristics, but how messy it is, how challenging it is, how it plays out much better in some parts of the world than other parts of the world.
With this said, I believe relevance is very important. And a lot of parents, as well as teachers, of course, understand that not only children learn differently, but they're also interested in different things. To make learning meaningful, a lot of times teachers do allow them to focus on the area of their interests, which also, of course, cannot be done indefinitely. So how can a content become important and meaningful to a student if he or she is not necessarily interested in it?
Well, I think it's great to be giving more latitude to student interest, but I don't think we should tell ourselves that every moment has to be interesting to every student. I'm more worried about relevance than raw field of interest. And in fact, we know from research that one of the reasons students are less interested is because they're asked to learn many things they don't see as relevant. And they're right. So if we can share with students learning that is plainly relevant to their lives, if we can foreground its significance, and if we can emphasize how it has a larger significance than just the individual moment and the egocentric viewpoint, themes like energy sources or global warming, all of these help to motivate the student who may not have that much intrinsic interest in the topic, but can find some interest in it through its significance.
Of course, there are a lot of educators right now who realize that there is a need to teach within a larger context. But when it comes to something very specific, a specific content or a concept, like human muscle systems, for example,
Mm.
how can one find this bigger context or big understanding or that kind of significance?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the phrase big understandings because it seems to me we should try to wrap whatever youngsters learn
Mm-hmm.
within big understandings. And big understandings have some characteristics. They offer insight, they inform our action in the world,
Mm-hmm.
they share an ethical perspective, and most of all, they come with opportunity. There are many ways to plug them into life as it goes on. So,
Mm-hmm.
here's an example of the human muscle system. Sounds like a boring and narrow topic, but
Yes.
suppose we wrap it in the context of sports.
Mm-hmm.
Sport is a fundamental human enterprise. People engage in sports, people watch sports, and you know what? Sports depend on muscles. They depend on the human muscle system.
Absolutely.
The dangers of sports have a lot to do with the human muscle system. If that were developed as a frame, well, let's check those criteria. Do we get insight? Yes, we get insight into a fundamental human activity. Does it inform our action? Well, it may well inform how we handle ourselves in sport.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an ethical perspective? Well, consider all concerned today with sports injuries, with trauma to the head, with trauma to muscle, and so forth. Finally, opportunity comes up all the time. So the right movement of that theme of the human muscle system could be powerfully informative for players of sports and for viewers of sports. So there's one way you might handle that. And there are certainly other ways to handle the same theme.
Well, that seems to be, again, about that kind of relevance piece.
Absolutely.
And I also think that part of the problem is not that the content separated a lot of times from students' lives, but also from a subject to a subject. And I think because of this, what you mentioned about teaching in a larger context or theme, a lot of schools do try today to teach a theme-based curriculum. Like Finland, for example, is offering a phenomenon-based curriculum for part-time to its students when they focus more on the topics like human beings and energy, things like this. But if we are to entertain such an idea, what themes seem to be more meaningful? On which themes we should be focused? And consequently, is it really beneficial to students to learn this way?
Well, that's a wonderful question, too. And one of my pleasures over the past years has been to look around the world at the kinds of things some schools are doing. And it's really very provocative. So regardless of particular national standards, there are some trends. There are some trends in the thematic structure of education in innovative schools. And let me share those with you. I like to call them the 6 beyond, because each of these 6 steps beyond business as usual. So beyond number 1 is beyond content.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of schools are paying attention to 21st century skills, thinking skills, competencies, and so on. That's exciting. Another trend is beyond local. That connects to the theme of global learning that you mentioned. There's a big emphasis on global perspective, problems, global study, empathy and understanding of other cultures and other ethnicities. Beyond number 3 is beyond topics. It's not just about studying the topic for its own sake. It's about understanding the topic as a tool for thinking about the rest of the world, the rest of your life. Then there's beyond the traditional disciplines. It doesn't have to be just about, physics or algebra. Philosophy in the schools, for instance, is a provocative perspective. Or the ecological big picture of our world, bringing in themes that aren't so common in traditional curriculum. Then another beyond is beyond the discrete disciplines to interdisciplinary studies. And one reason that's important is that every big problem you can think of in the world today is almost inevitably interdisciplinary. Problems of ecology, problems of global warming, problems of war and peace, problems of the economy. All of these involve multiple disciplines to understand them and to deal with them. And finally, beyond prescribed content, that picks up a theme you mentioned before.
Yes, it
Little
does.
more elbow room for students to engage fronts they find particularly interesting and relevant. Now, if we could push in those 6 thematic directions, education would be much more relevant and much more exciting than it often is today.
Well, that is that you mentioned the global part of it is also important as far as the future goes. So we do talk a lot about preparing our students for the future. So from the future perspective, how can we know today which knowledge is going to be meaningful for their future lives? Are there any criteria that can be guided us in this direction?
Well, it might be hard to predict 500 years ahead, but it's not so hard 20 years ahead.
Okay.
Can we imagine a world in 20 years where energy still isn't an issue?
Mm-hmm.
Our concern with ecologies still don't pose puzzle for politicians and manufacturers? Can we imagine a world 20 years ahead where there are no issues of human violence, human conflict, war, revolution? I don't think so. There are many abiding themes that are bound to be with us in 10 or 20 years. And we don't have to construct an education that lasts for 500 years. We only have to construct an education that will speak powerfully to human lives as students live on another 5, another 10, another 20, 40 years. That's not so challenging.
No, it doesn't seem it is. But my other question is from maybe a realm of a wishful thinking. If we were, as a nation, to decide on one biggest or fundamental understanding that all our students need to form in order to live in a global society, and then base our curriculum on forming this understanding, what would that be?
Well, of course, you know you're asking 2 impossible questions.
I know.
The one question is who should decide, and the other question is what should they decide on?
Exactly.
Even though they're impossible questions, I'll take a crack at both of them. As to the who, my own feeling is that any decision about directions of content in schools should be multi-layered. There can be big policies at the top, broad directions at the top, but I think there should be latitude for creativity and latitude for energy down to the state level, the school level, and the individual teacher level. Everybody should be involved at some level of brain in significant decision-making about what's taught and what's learned. And that includes a certain amount of elbow room for students as well. So I am for some general order in the system, but I am not for an extremely tight autocratic framework.
Okay.
That's the who.
That's the who.
As to the what, the other impossible question. Well, if you want a broad through line that touches everything, I think we all have to recognize there's no one answer to that. One person might suggest one thing, one person might suggest another, and they could both work pretty well. If we take it that there's no one answer, I'll give you a sample answer. One possibility that might play pretty well, and I'll give you a little case for it. So suppose we chose a through line like the physical world and the human condition. Let me say a word about how that might play. So the physical world includes things like, of course, physics and astronomy, biology, and so on. How the physical world works, including the biological. The human condition includes the social sciences, history, literature, the art, and so on. How the human world works. Mathematics, by the way, straddles the two, because mathematics speaks powerfully both to the physical world and the human condition. Now that sounds like two topics, and in a way, you could say it's two topics, but the point is that they powerfully braid with one another.
Absolutely there.
The physical world is a powerful constraint and a powerful source of resources for the human condition. The human condition is inevitably profoundly shaped by the physical world and how the physical world works, the ways of nature. The natural world is the world we live in and try to reconstruct according to our own needs. But it goes the other way too. The theories we make up about the physical world and the way we test our views of the natural world, these emanate from human cognition, from the way theories get built, from the way we look at and formulate understandings. Mm-hmm. So it goes both ways. And of course, our civilization has become so expansive that it is fundamentally altering the physical world in which we live in profound ways, through extinction of species, through, many argue, global warming, and so forth. So something like the natural world and the human condition would represent a pretty ample theme that one could spin out in all sorts of directions. But of course, one big theme leaves many questions about how to play it out. And I'm sure there are other big themes that would work just as well. There's a sample, though.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for this conversation.
Well, it's a pleasure to try to think about these things together and figure out a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Today's biology identifies humans as essentially emotional and social creatures. But when it comes to education, we often neglect to consider that the high-level cognitive skills that we try to teach our children are rooted in emotional functions. Despite all the differences in how kids learn, what stays constant is that only students can be creators of their own learning. There should be a free will to learn, or there will be no learning. It seems rather clear that the content of education should not be limited to the encyclopedic knowledge. But what is worth learning? How is it transferred into curricula across years? And what exact content to cover are subjects that require our collective attention.